Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. As you know, my name is Mary Baker, and I'm here to give you the education, the tools, and the motivation to identify exactly what's in your way today and what you can do about it. So let's get started. Now, we've been talking for a while about the concept of healthy boundaries, and I really hope you had some good takeaways from those episodes and are doing your boundary work. I know several of you have contacted me and let me know just how great this has been for you. So I encourage you to keep doing that, because having boundaries in place, or at least working on them, is really going to be crucial for us to do some really deep work on our self-concept this month. But before we dive in, another shout out to those of you who are doing great work and spreading the podcast around. Keep at it and keep it going. So this month, just like in the beginning episodes, I want to take a deep dive into the idea of self-concept. Now, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around self-concept, as I've said before. So I want to be clear and say, I look at self-concept as your self-esteem. I look at your self-concept as your level of self-love, of self-acceptance, and of self-trust. It's about you feeling grounded and secure most days. It's about you seeing an internal locus of control as opposed to external, that all the power lies outside of you. Like I've said many times on these episodes, it's about owning what you think, what you feel, what you need, what you believe, what your gifts are, what you're passionate about, what your values are, what you want, what you choose, and how you behave. Essentially, your self-concept is how you see your own self-worth. And like we talked about in the very beginning episodes, and I encourage you to go back to episodes 1 through 5 if you need to, either to listen to them for the first time or as a refresher, how you see yourself and making sure that you don't see your worth as conditional upon anything outside of you. Now, I personally think that everything, mental health-wise and personal growth-wise and success-wise, emanates from our self-concept. It also, of course, will color how we treat others, because we can only give others what we've given to ourselves. And the worse a person deep down feels about themselves, i.e. has tons of shame, the worse they're going to treat others. They will cut others down when they're feeling crappy about themselves. They'll be nasty and name-calling and defensive and manipulative, especially during conflict. So that's why I think this is such an important concept. And it was so important to work on boundaries first, like I said, because first we need to define what our rights are, where we end and others begin, draw that chalk circle around the self, so to speak, so that we can begin to do the work. Because as crazy as it sounds, a lot of people struggle because there are blurred lines between you and others, or what you and others think about you. I think that a poor self-concept has direct correlations with struggling with anxiety, especially with panic attacks, with depression, with avoidance, with controlling behaviors, trying to focus on fixing everyone outside of you kind of thing. So, as you can see, I think it's a pretty important concept. Now, as we have also talked about before, I don't do vacuums. And so I want to start today by getting a little deeper into the toxic environments early on in someone's life that can really contribute to self-concept issues. And so I want to get in a little bit about verbal abuse again and why it's so important. Now, it's not like I haven't talked about this before, but if I'm repeating something, you know it's really important to me. And most of this, I'm sure you know, but I'm not looking for that. What I want you to do is, as you listen today, I want you to get gut level honest about your own upbringing and your own environments even today and see if any of this applies, because that's really going to matter if it does. So we know that verbal abuse is very hurtful, right? It's about making character attacks about someone's abilities, their decisions, and the vulnerabilities of the other person. It's using questions, under the guise of wanting to know the answer, but just really, making the receiver of the question feel crappy and shame-based. Because the meta message is, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you as a person? Not the poor decision you made. So that's important. A lot of times what can be really even more crazy making is that person can also be very different in public than they are in private. So it really messes with your head when neighbors come up to you and say, your dad's just a great guy. He's so helpful to everyone. Whereas behind closed doors, a different dad. Or you've seen both in action. It's like, what do you do with that? A lot of times what we do with that is we internalize the crazy. We internalize the crazy. And we question ourselves and again, disown. Verbal abuse is often really just projected shame onto the other person. Because here's the thing, this, no one who really likes themselves really needs, quote unquote, to be abusive to another person. And abuse can be really overt and obvious. That's the easy stuff, right? Or covert, what I call emotional terrorism, like the subtle comments that are just as piercing and almost worse. Again, if someone's blowing up in front of you, you both see that you're not nuts. They have to kind of own that. But when it's subtle and it's under the table and it's a knife in the back, they don't have to own anything. In fact, you take that on oftentimes. And then even confronting them about it, they have a quick answer. Oh, I was just trying to be helpful. Or I just really wanted to make sure you made the right decision and all that crap. Verbal abuse, in my book, is all about control and manipulation. It's meant to make you feel bad about yourself, to feel powerless and defensive. Again, a projection. What people tell you about you and how they treat you tells you a hell of a lot more about them than you. In fact, the gift is always about the giver, as you'll hear me say often. The abuser wants you to lose your self-confidence and doubt your own abilities, even and especially, I think, your thinking. Redesigning your reality, oh boy, is a classic way that they can chip away at your strength. That could be they come back to you after an argument and make it up. You think I'm a horrible person, they say. When you didn't say that, you were just trying to point out a problem. Boy, is that manipulative and used often. When there's unpredictability and uncertainty, you never know what to expect and you're kept off balance. The eggshells on the floor. And that is considered abusive. Again, not to just have a bad day, but on average, if someone is blowing up or calm or nice or they keep changing, they do 180s. One day they're fine with something that you guys agreed on. The next day they never said that. Oh boy. That's gaslighting, guys. Not okay. There's a disproportionate emotional reaction and there's lots of drama to normal happenings, right? It makes it really feel chaotic and unsafe. It's not okay. It's not congruent. There's abusive information about you. God, I had a client tell me this the other day. When she gets in an argument with him, he uses her vulnerable things that she struggles with or isn't good at or has screwed up against her as a power play in an argument because he doesn't have great self-esteem. Not okay. People earn the right to hear our story, right? You should never have that thrown back in your face, nor should you do that to others. People do that when they get desperate, I think, and they're out of cards, right? There's that one nasty card in their back pocket that they pull. Not good. If you start feeling like you want to do that, or if you just, if you hurled a nasty at someone else, I would stop and say, what's going on with me? I must need to set a boundary here, stop the conversation, regroup, so that I can be emotionally honest with myself and with them. A big thing about ambient abuse is it's gaslighting. It's where they create an atmosphere of fear, instability, and irritability. They mess with your head, again, rewriting reality, pretending conversations never happened. They didn't say that. You must be nuts. You're not remembering right. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with your head? That's all gaslighting. They don't want you to be grounded and confident in your truth. In really dysfunctional families, especially alcoholic homes, there's that overt and covert message. There ain't nothing happening here. What's wrong with you? This is fine. Go back in your room. Put it under the rug and don't you dare tell anybody because we got to keep the looking good going. Gaslighting. Verbal abuse is all about manipulation and control. That's all you really need to know. Okay, we're done. No. But that is really, really important to get that down. It's about unsolicited, unconstructive criticism. It's about taking your inventory. It's about invading your privacy, about your thoughts and your feelings and your beliefs about yourself. It is toxic and should not be tolerated. If you start feeling like you have to have your guard up or you don't want to tell that person important things, especially vulnerable things like your fears or how you feel about them, some people call it speaking truth to power. In this instance, it's perceived power, right? You're like, oh, that's really going to go south if I bring that up. Then you're in a toxic relationship. Or you grew up in a home where, like we've talked about many times on these episodes, you weren't allowed to have your thoughts, feelings, choices, and behaviors. And God forbid you called out something that was hurtful. Your only recourse was to stuff it, swallow it, push it away, and therefore push down your truth around that truth. So attacking, blaming, accusing, shaming, we know all come from their self-loathing projected onto you. Oftentimes, this is just how those in power treated the abuser when they were a child. I would say about 99% of the time. Abuse is a means, then, of getting back at this lost sense of power. By becoming, quote-unquote, more powerful over someone else who's deemed to be the weaker one. I mean, guys, we know about bullying that when that child feels really beat up and disempowered, often by their parent, they go to school and what do? Pick the smallest kid on the playground. They have to. It's all about power. We need deep down to feel empowered. Manipulation and control, of course, as we know, was probably an early coping mechanism, is modeled to them early on and proven fruitful because emotional honesty and valuing the person was not allowed for them. So abusers often seek out and target those who are vulnerable, of course, and victims seek out abusers unconsciously and therefore react. So if you keep putting these people in your life, or if you've married this person who's just like your father, you know why. Being abusive is a childish and immature reaction to life, I think, because adult behaviors of assertiveness and personal responsibility have not been obtained yet because of their own wounds. We've been talking about being developmentally stuck in that regard emotionally. We've been talking about emotional maturity. A healthy person has no need to abuse another because they have enough self-love and therefore respect for the separation and the self-love of the other. They want you to feel good about yourself. There are healthy boundaries in place as well. Abuse is just really a jacked up means of connection, of enmeshing the abuser with the victim. It's really sad because the abuser is a wounded person with very little sense, if any, of personal power. Even if they seem successful in some areas, just don't get sucked into that and think that they have great self-esteem. That's often not the case. Remember, all their behavior is fear-based. It's about they're afraid they may not get what they need by being nice. They might be controlled, then they have to fight for what they want and need. Only by exerting power over others can they be honored, is their perception. And being abusive doesn't always mean yelling and screaming. Anytime you're emotionally dishonest and therefore act out your stuff, like we've talked about, rather than speaking honestly and respectfully, it is abusive. These behaviors destroy emotional trust in our relationships, and they can decimate a child's self-esteem. Even being in an adult relationship long enough with abusive people can make us forget our own name, much less allow us to feel safe, loved, and confident. Now, as I said earlier, I really wanted us to work on boundaries because we need to have a decent understanding of healthy boundaries to work on self-concept. Because it's amazing, when we look at any number of issues in any given relationship, we can usually boil it down to a boundary problem in my book, regardless of how subtle it may seem on the surface. So here are some reasons why, and I've talked about some of these before. Treat it as a refresher if you need to. Bottom line is it feels emotionally unsafe. It feels emotionally unsafe to be in the presence of someone who is either verbally abusive in an overt way, like shaming you overtly, or yelling or screaming or stomping or whatever, but even worse when someone is being passive-aggressive via subtle manipulation, telling us what to think or feel or do, especially when someone is being reasonable, yet then out of the blue takes a subtle jab and an indirect insult. Here's the boundary issue there. Your psychological and emotional boundaries are being violated in that moment. The other person is not respecting your thoughts. What you feel or what you need is valid. You are the only person who gets to decide if that stuff sounds crazy or if it's valid or somewhere in between. You start to lose yourself. Ever have the experience where right after a conversation with someone, you say to yourself, God, what the hell just happened there? Wait a minute, just prior to talking to them, I felt fine. I knew exactly what my truth was. I knew what I wanted to say. I knew what I thought. I knew what I felt. And I was at peace with that. See, when we connect with someone who manipulates us out of believing our own truth, we can very quickly forget who we really are. As soon as we begin to change what our truth is, we become someone that suits others rather than honoring what is real for us. So if you feel this after an interaction with someone, look at the conversation and their behaviors. You probably feel nuts because the real you knows the truth. So here comes the internal conflict I mention all the time. Your real self and your scared false self is a term for it. You know, the self that, the one where we're what everybody else needs instead of who we really are. You know, healthy relationships are ones where we can each stay in our truth and it's okay. In fact, people want that. Each person respects what is going on for the other and not threatened by it. Or if they start to feel threatened by it, they sit with themselves. They're like, what's going on with me and what do I need to do to work on that? As Robert Burney points out, and I'll put his resource in the show notes, Healthy relationships are ones where we can be ourselves, take care of ourselves, and have that honored. There are no blurred lines. Communication is clear and direct. We are not guessing what the other person is really trying to say, what they may be insinuating, and so forth, so we feel safe. Unhealthy relationships are ones where we often feel drained, stressed, anxious, or frustrated a lot of the time. Look at your connections and look for the boundary violations. Look for the manipulation. Look at whatever doesn't feel emotionally honest. Look for the lack of healthy separateness. Look for the innuendo. I want you to do this so that you start to recognize and detach your real, genuine self from their stuff. That's so important. So we've talked before about how the big setup is our childhood. The first 10 or 11 years of life are our first classroom. What they say to us about us, how they treat us. So when there aren't healthy boundaries in those relationships, during the time period in our lives when we're supposed to be building our self-concept, this can have huge impacts. You know, a young child who relies on their caregivers for love, protection, and validation. They need to know that they are okay, so they can be vulnerable and powerless and scared. When their thoughts, feelings, and body or energy are violated, though, or dismissed or threatened, the child learns either overtly or covertly that in order not to lose parental love, like we've talked about before, they have to shut down their reality in order to survive, in order to not be abandoned, in order to cope, in order to make the family okay, because maybe your brother was always acting up and getting the snot beat out of him, or there was a lot of conflict, so you decided to be the good child. But then you began to disown the self. So then you had no recourse but to begin to seek validation outside of you and ignore your internal cues. This then sets the stage for you to seek out and continue, here it comes, to allow others to violate you in different ways because it seems normal. So how do we lose our boundaries? We look outside ourselves for acceptance and feel uncomfortable alone. The important person is in place of power in your life, usually a caregiver to a child, and later others are deemed more important because what your parents were supposed to do is let you be important. Let you have your thoughts, feelings, choices, and behaviors. Let you own yourself and be okay with that. That was their job. But if no one did it for them, there was no way they could do that for you. Then your boundaries get violated and you start to very quickly ignore your real thoughts, your real feelings, your intuition, and say yes anyway for fear of losing them. Then, since you're not rejected, you are quote-unquote taught that you will survive and not lose that love, and that maybe you'll even rescue the family from the god-awful things that are happening. So you have to then continue little by little, bit by bit over the years to disown your inner reality and to begin losing your self-esteem because you need to become what others need you to be to continue the agenda. Everyone is somewhere on the continuum of this. Your job is to figure out what the setup really was. What are the situations in your life today where you have replicated the setup, not meaning to, of course, no one sets out to do that, and why you might not feel in touch with you. And you might be angry at them, but deep down there's a disconnect between you and your real self. You could be medicating, you could be running around and caretaking everyone else, ignoring what you need, ignoring your self-care, You might have anxiety issues and depression and migraines and stomach issues and all sorts of stuff, all kinds of stress and chaos. So the core concept of this episode is all about getting back to your true self. It's about looking at the origins of how you may have lost you and really diving deep into how to get them back. Little by little, bit by bit. It starts with boundaries where you end and others begin. It starts by every day you get up, really taking a look at where is that internal locus of control. Is that where I am? Or have I externalized my control for the past few weeks? Need to bring it back to myself. What's going on with me? I need some loving accountability. Let me check in with someone. Let me look at my relationships that are around me today. How healthy are they? What dynamics have I set up with my own kids? Have I reconstituted my childhood in certain ways? Of course, without wanting to and without realizing it. You'll start working on your procrastination, your anxiety, your perfectionism, all your fear-based control behaviors, your compliance patterns, your self-sabotage, all that stuff. You will turn all of that around. How well do I nurture other people's self-esteem? Remember the myopic. It's really hard to see outside of our own pain. Conversely, like I always say, when we heal ourselves or begin to heal ourselves, we organically want that for everyone else. We want them to feel good too. As you nurture your self-esteem, you will organically want to build up your kids. You're going to want to be more gentle. You're not going to want to shame them and yell at them when you're frustrated. Not that you ever intended to hurt them. But you're going to be a lot more aware of how people treated you, how people still treat you, and in turn, how you treat others. The work starts outside in almost. We look at how we got here, and then we really start looking at, oh my gosh, what am I spitting out in my life? Because if we don't look at also how we are doing some of these behaviors, there is no way we can feel truly good about ourselves. Because the real self never needs to do any of that. Those are all coping mechanisms. They're fear-based defense mechanisms. The opposite is owning it. Owning what you really think, what you really feel, how you really act, what you really choose, what your values are, and what you believe. Owning that. Owning all the aspects. Good, bad, ugly, and indifferent. It's probably going to be harder for you to own some of the good stuff at first, and that's okay. You'll minimize, push away compliments. You'll skip over. You'll beat yourself up and obsess, like a client said the other day, for 3 days on how she did that conversation. Don't. Just stop. Own it. Okay. I don't need to obsess about it to avoid feeling, which is what we're doing. I feel like crap. Do I need to call them and make an amend? Do I need to figure out what the lesson is here? What am I learning? What's showing up for me to look at? Because that's all that's happening. This is not about being hard on yourself, because if you're hard on yourself, you're disowning yourself even more. Don't do that. Just take ownership of it. But be kind and look at the context. Look at the big setup. A lot of this is not your fault. Today it is your responsibility as a grown-up. If you want to change it, you can. This is all changeable stuff. Takes effort, takes commitment. You got to work it like a part-time job if you want really good results. It's not a one and done. It's not a 3-month course and you graduate. This work is ongoing, but it is foundational and it gets better and better. and expansive as you go. So today we talked about the big setup, and we talked about possible toxic environments that might be around you still, to where it's really hard to be you. I hope it brought you good awareness. I hope that if whatever resonated with you is something that you want to work on, I hope that it was meaningful. My encouragement is to, if you haven't already, go to the show notes at ownitpowercast.com and sign up to get the download for some great sentence stems that I put together for you that are pretty powerful. I encourage you to give yourself some time to finish them and explore. They might bring up some emotion. If you're a tribe member, you already got that in your newsletter, so you're all set. If you feel like you don't have a lot of great, healthy support around you, this is some deep work. I encourage you to gather some support. Come join us in our Facebook group. The link is right in the show notes. You can come on in. It's a closed group. I keep it very healthy, and it's a safe place to work on yourself. So, like I always say, keep paying it forward, keep focusing on you, and see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.